I needed some repairs done around my house, so I looked for a handyman online. Found this guy with good reviews, seemed legit. He arrived one afternoon, polite and all, introduced himself as Jake. At first, everything seemed fine. He got to work, fixing things around the house. But there was something off about him, this intense gaze that made me feel uneasy. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just my imagination playing tricks. He finished the repairs and was about to leave when he asked if he could use the bathroom. Seemed innocent enough, so I showed him where it was. He was taking longer than expected, and I started feeling this sense of unease, like something was wrong. I went to check on him, and I saw him going through my stuff, rifling through drawers. I froze, not knowing what to do. He looked at me, this sinister grin on his face. He started saying something about how nice my things were, how he could make a good profit off them. My heart raced, and fear gripped me. I tried to stay calm, telling him he should leave. But he just laughed, saying he wasn't going anywhere, that I shouldn't make a fuss. I grabbed my phone, pretending to call the police, hoping it would scare him off. But he snatched the phone from me, saying they wouldn't get here in time. He started advancing towards me, this menacing look in his eyes. I was terrified, trapped in my own home with this dangerous stranger. I tried to reason with him, pleading for him to leave, but he wasn't listening. He had this twisted plan, talking about how he needed to tie up loose ends, and that included me. I managed to grab a kitchen knife, holding it in front of me, trying to defend myself. He laughed, mocking my attempts, saying I didn't have it in me to use it. He lunged at me, and I reacted, swinging the knife blindly. There was a struggle, and he stumbled back, clutching his arm, blood gushing out. I didn't waste any time. I ran out of the house, not daring to look back. I called the police from a neighbor's house, telling them what happened. They arrived and found him still in my house, injured. They arrested him and took him away, but the terror of that encounter stayed with me. I couldn't believe how close I came to something so dangerous. That feeling of being violated in my own home, the fear of a stranger's sinister intentions, it was a nightmare I couldn't shake off. I had to change all the locks, increase security measures. The sense of safety I once felt in my own home was shattered, replaced by constant fear and paranoia. It made me question who I let into my life, made me realize how easily danger can walk through the front door. I was alone at home, just trying to unwind after a long day. The night was quiet, and I was settling in when the phone rang. I picked it up, expecting maybe a wrong number or a telemarketer. But there was nothing on the other end, just silence. I said hello a few times, but it stayed silent. I figured it was a glitch or maybe someone misdialing, so I hung up and went back to what I was doing. Minutes passed, and the phone rang again. I hesitated before answering, but curiosity got the better of me. Again, silence. It was weird, this eerie feeling creeping up on me. I started feeling uneasy, like someone was watching me. I tried to brush it off, thinking it was just my imagination running wild. I turned up the TV, trying to distract myself. But then, the phone rang a third time. I felt this knot in my stomach, this sinking feeling of dread. I answered, hoping it would stop. This time, I heard breathing on the other end, faint but distinct. My heart raced, and I asked who it was, but no response. Just the sound of someone breathing. I hung up, trying to convince myself it was a prank or a wrong number. But then, it rang again, and again, and again. Every time I picked up, it was the same silence, breathing, no words. I was scared, alone in the house, the darkness outside making it all feel more sinister. I closed all the curtains, trying to block out the feeling of being watched. I called the police, telling them about the calls. They said they'd keep an eye out in the area, but there wasn't much they could do at that moment. The phone kept ringing, and I stopped answering, but the sound made my heart race every time. It felt like whoever was calling knew I was alone, that I was vulnerable. Then, I heard something outside, a faint sound of footsteps. I froze, trying to convince myself it was just the wind or a neighbor. But it felt too deliberate, too close to be just random noises. I went to check, feeling this overwhelming fear. I peered out the window but couldn't see anything in the darkness. My hands were shaking, and I felt this paralyzing terror. I heard a voice, soft but chilling, coming from outside. It said something about knowing I was alone, about coming closer. I felt a chill run down my spine, my heart pounding in my chest. I locked all the doors and windows, trying to keep calm. But the phone kept ringing, the calls getting more frequent, more persistent. I was on the verge of tears, feeling completely helpless. I called a friend, needing someone to talk to, someone to reassure me I wasn't imagining things. They stayed on the line with me, trying to calm me down. But then, the line went dead. The call stopped, the eerie silence enveloping the house. I felt this overwhelming sense of dread, like something terrible was about to happen. I heard a sound at the back door, a soft knock. My heart stopped, and I didn't dare move. I whispered into the phone, telling my friend what was happening. Then, I heard the voice again, this time right outside the door. It said my name in a chilling whisper. I was paralyzed with fear, not knowing what to do, feeling trapped and alone. The police arrived shortly after, and the voice outside vanished. They searched the area, but there was no sign of anyone. I stayed with a friend that night, unable to go back home. The call stopped, but the terror of that night didn't. I was at home, just going about my day, when I heard a knock on the door. It was a bit unexpected. I wasn't really expecting anyone. I peeked through the peephole and saw this guy standing there, dressed like a salesman. I opened the door, thinking it'd be a quick exchange. But he had this pushy demeanor, insisting I listen to his sales pitch. I tried to decline politely, saying I wasn't interested, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. He kept talking, getting more persistent by the minute. I tried to shut the door, but he put his foot in the way, blocking it. That's when I started feeling uneasy, this guy not taking the hint. He started raising his voice, saying I needed what he was selling, that it was a limited time offer. I felt this knot forming in my stomach, this creeping sense of danger. I told him firmly to leave, but he just got more aggressive, leaning in closer. I could feel my heart racing, this salesman becoming more and more threatening by the second. I tried to push the door closed, but he shoved back, trying to force his way in. Panic gripped me, and I realized I needed to get him away from my house. I shouted, hoping someone nearby would hear, but there was no one around. I grabbed a nearby broom, holding it up as a warning. He laughed, saying I wouldn't dare use it. I was scared, feeling cornered and alone. I managed to push him back enough to slam the door shut and lock it. But he didn't leave. He kept banging on the door, shouting threats and insults. I called the police, telling them what was happening. They said they'd send someone over, but it felt like an eternity waiting for them to arrive. The banging continued, getting louder and more intense. I could feel the fear coursing through me, not knowing what this guy was capable of. I checked the windows, making sure they were locked, but I could still hear him outside, taunting me. I felt this overwhelming sense of vulnerability, this maniacal salesman relentless in his pursuit. I heard a crash, and my heart skipped a beat. He was trying to break in. I frantically searched for something to defend myself with, anything to keep him out. I found a heavy vase and held onto it tightly, ready to use it if he managed to get inside. The adrenaline was pumping through me, and I felt this primal fear taking over. I heard footsteps approaching the back of the house, and I knew he was trying to find another way in. I was shaking, feeling this overwhelming terror, not knowing if I'd be able to fend him off. Then, I heard the sirens outside. The police had arrived. I could hear them shouting at him to get down on the ground. The banging stopped, and there was silence. The police arrested him, and I stayed locked inside until they assured me it was safe to come out. They said he had a history of aggressive behavior, that I did the right thing by calling them. I was home alone, just chilling, when things started getting weird. I was sitting in the living room, watching TV, when suddenly the lights flickered. It was odd, but I thought maybe it was just an electrical glitch. Then, the TV switched off by itself. I tried to turn it back on, but it wouldn't work. I figured maybe it was just a power surge, but then other things started happening. The thermostat suddenly went haywire, blasting cold air. I tried to adjust it, but it kept going colder and colder. I started feeling this chill, this sense of unease creeping in. I checked my phone to call a technician or something, but my phone wasn't connecting to the Wi-Fi. That's when I realized something was seriously wrong. I heard this voice coming from the speakers, this distorted, creepy voice saying things I couldn't understand. My heart started racing, and I felt this surge of panic. I tried to turn off the speakers, but they wouldn't respond. It was like someone else was controlling everything, manipulating my smart devices. Then, the lights started flickering again, this time in a pattern, almost like they were trying to communicate something. I felt this wave of terror, not knowing what was going on. I checked the security cameras through an app on my phone, and that's when I saw it. The cameras were glitching, showing random rooms, even though no one was there. It felt invasive, like someone was watching my every move. I heard footsteps upstairs, but I knew I was alone. I didn't dare go up, fearing what I might find. My heart was pounding, and I felt this overwhelming sense of being trapped. I tried calling the police, but the line was dead. I was completely cut off, no way to ask for help. Then, the kitchen appliances started acting up. The microwave turned on by itself, beeping loudly. The coffee machine started brewing, spilling coffee all over the counter. It was chaos, this feeling of being under attack in my own home. I heard whispers, faint but unmistakable, coming from the speakers. They were saying things that made no sense, taunting me, playing with my fear. I tried to stay calm, but I was terrified, not knowing what this person hacking into my smart devices wanted. It was like they had complete control over everything, and I was at their mercy. I found this note on the kitchen counter, a message from the hacker, saying they were watching me, that they knew everything about me. It sent shivers down my spine, this feeling of invasion of privacy. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys and bolted out of the house, not looking back until I was far away. I went to a neighbor's house and called the police. They arrived and searched the house, but they couldn't find anyone. They said it was likely a cyber intrusion, someone who hacked into my smart home system. They advised me to reset everything, change passwords, but the fear lingered. That feeling of being violated, of someone having control over my home, it was terrifying. I couldn't shake off the paranoia, the feeling of being watched even when I knew I was alone. I was expecting a friend to drop by that evening. It was getting late, and I thought it might be her, so when I heard a knock on the door, I didn't think much of it. I rushed to open it, assuming it was my friend. But it wasn't her. It was this guy I didn't recognize, standing there with this strange, unsettling look in his eyes. He said he needed help, that his car had broken down, and he needed to use my phone. I hesitated, feeling this sense of unease, but I didn't want to leave someone stranded if they genuinely needed help. I handed him my phone through the gap in the door, keeping the chain lock on, trying to be cautious. He dialed a number, talking in hushed tones, and then he suddenly looked up at me, this cold, piercing gaze that made my skin crawl. He mumbled something about his friend not answering and asked if he could use the bathroom. I felt this chill run down my spine, this gut feeling that something wasn't right. But I didn't want to seem rude or paranoid, so I reluctantly unlocked the door and let him in. As he walked past me, I noticed his demeanor changed, this unsettling shift in his energy. He seemed more aggressive, more invasive. I watched him go into the bathroom, feeling this sense of dread building up inside me. I tried to tell myself it was just nerves, but I couldn't shake off this feeling of danger. Then, I heard him rummaging through things in the bathroom, this invasive searching that made my heart race. I wanted to confront him, but I was paralyzed with fear. He came out and asked for a glass of water. I complied, feeling this sense of being trapped in my own home with a stranger who made me incredibly uncomfortable. He started asking personal questions, invasive stuff that felt too probing. I tried to keep my answers vague, not wanting to give away too much. Then, he got too close, invading my personal space. I could feel this panic rising inside me, this fear that something was seriously wrong. I said I needed to leave the room for a moment, making an excuse to go to the kitchen. I was shaking, trying to think of a way out, feeling this intense dread. I heard him following me, and I knew I had to do something. I grabbed my phone and pretended to receive a call, saying I had to step outside for a minute. I rushed out the door, not looking back, and called the police. I told them what happened, that a stranger was in my house and making me feel unsafe. I stayed outside, feeling this overwhelming fear, not knowing what he was doing inside my home. The police arrived, and they went in to search, but he was gone. They said there wasn't much they could do, that he didn't technically break any laws. But they advised me to be cautious, to always trust my instincts. I was going about my usual routine, but something felt off. Little things out of place, things moved slightly. At first, I thought it was just me being forgetful. But it kept happening, this nagging feeling that something wasn't right. I'd leave for work, and when I came back, I'd noticed things shifted, a chair moved, a book slightly out of place. It was subtle, but it sent shivers down my spine. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I must be imagining things. Then, I found a few items missing, a piece of jewelry, some cash. I panicked, wondering if I misplaced them or if someone had been in my home. I checked all the windows and doors, making sure everything was locked, but there were no signs of forced entry. I couldn't shake this feeling of being violated, of someone intruding into my private space. I started feeling paranoid, constantly checking over my shoulder, questioning every little noise in the house. I changed the locks, hoping it would give me some peace of mind, but the signs persisted. I find small things, footprints where there shouldn't be any, a door left slightly ajar. I installed security cameras, thinking it would help catch whoever was sneaking in. But when I reviewed the footage, there was nothing conclusive, just shadows and vague movements. I became obsessed, checking the footage every day, hoping for a clue, for something to make sense of it all. But the more I watched, the more terrified I became. There were moments where I swore I saw a figure lurking in the darkness, but it was always too vague to be certain. I confided in friends and family, but they thought I was overreacting, that it was probably just my imagination. But I knew, deep down, that something wasn't right. I started staying at friends' places, trying to avoid being alone in my own home. But no matter where I went, that feeling of being watched, of someone intruding into my life, persisted. I called the police, but without concrete evidence, there was little they could do. They suggested installing more cameras, keeping a log of any suspicious activity, but it felt futile. I couldn't focus, couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house felt like an intruder, every shadow a potential threat. I became hypervigilant, constantly on edge. Then, one night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. My heart raced as I grabbed a flashlight, quietly creeping through the house, trying to locate the source of the sound. I found a door slightly ajar, a door I was sure I had closed. Fear gripped me, and I felt this surge of adrenaline as I pushed it open, expecting to confront whoever was inside. But there was no one. The house was empty, the rooms quiet. I searched every corner, every crevice, but there was no sign of an intruder. I felt this overwhelming sense of dread, this realization that someone had been here, had invaded my home, and I didn't know who or why. I stayed up the rest of the night, feeling vulnerable and exposed. When morning came, I packed a bag and left, unable to stay in that house a moment longer. I moved to a new place, hoping for a fresh start, but the fear stayed with me. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of someone sneaking into my home while I was away. I never found out who it was or why they targeted me. It's a haunting experience, this constant feeling of intrusion and violation, this uncertainty of not knowing if it'll happen again. I moved into this quiet neighborhood a few months ago, looking for a peaceful place to call home. But things started feeling off after a while. It was subtle at first, just this nagging feeling that something wasn't right. I'd catch glimpses of my neighbors watching me from their windows. It felt weird, this constant feeling of being observed, like I was under a microscope. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just paranoia, but it persisted. Whenever I'd step outside, I'd feel their eyes on me, this unsettling sensation that I was being scrutinized. It made me uneasy, always looking over my shoulder, wondering why they were so interested in my life. I'd hear whispers when I passed by their houses, this hushed conversation that stopped abruptly when they saw me. It felt like they were talking about me, about my every move. One day, I found footprints leading from my backyard to my front porch. They weren't mine, and they weren't there the day before. It sent chills down my spine, this feeling of someone trespassing on my property. I tried to confront my neighbors, asking if they had seen anything unusual, but they feigned ignorance, brushing it off like it was nothing. But I knew something wasn't right. I noticed their curtains twitching whenever I walked by, this constant surveillance that made me feel like I was being monitored every second. It was suffocating, this feeling of having no privacy, no space to breathe. I started closing my blinds, keeping them shut all the time, trying to block out their prying eyes. but I could still feel their presence, this feeling of being watched, even when I was inside my own home. At night, I'd hear noises outside, faint but distinct, like someone walking around my house. I'd peek through the curtains, but I couldn't see anyone. It was this constant fear of someone lurking just beyond my sight. I couldn't sleep, feeling this paranoia consuming me. Every shadow felt like a threat, every noise a potential intruder. I started second-guessing every creak in the floor, every rustle of leaves outside. I called the police, telling them about the strange occurrences, but they said there was nothing they could do without solid evidence. They suggested installing security cameras, but the thought of having to watch the footage to confirm my fears terrified me even more. I became reclusive, avoiding going out unless absolutely necessary. But even then, I'd feel their eyes on me, this suffocating pressure that made me want to run and hide. I started noticing odd things around my house, my mail tampered with, my garden disturbed. It felt like someone was deliberately trying to unsettle me, to make me feel unsafe in my own home. I felt this sense of isolation, this fear that I was alone in this battle against an unseen threat. I confided in a friend, but they dismissed it as paranoia, saying I was imagining things. Then, one evening, I saw one of my neighbors standing outside, staring directly at my house. They had this sinister smile on their face that made my blood run cold. I tried to ignore it, but the image lingered, this unsettling feeling that they knew something I didn't. I decided to confront them, to ask why they were watching me, but when I approached, they pretended not to notice me. It was eerie, this deliberate avoidance, this refusal to acknowledge my presence. I felt this overwhelming sense of dread, this realization that I was alone in this, that no one would believe me. It was a nightmare, this feeling of being trapped, of being watched by my neighbors who seemed to have ill intentions. I started packing my things, unable to stay in that place any longer. I moved to a new neighborhood, hoping for a fresh start, but the fear stayed with me.